Now let's move to the second process, which is insertion, or what we call epenthesis. This process also belongs to the syllable structure processes because it affects also the distribution of sounds between syllables. Now, when we say epenthesis or insertion, it's totally the opposite of deletion. If deletion is about deleting a sound that existed in the phonetic form and becomes absent in the phonetic form, insertion is about the opposite. It's actually about inserting a sound that did not exist in the phonemic form and it becomes there in the phonetic form. Epenthesis is about when a sound appears in the phonetic form that was actually absent in the phonemic form. It was nothing in the abstract mind, but it becomes something in the actual pronunciation. Let's take the example of r. In phonology, r becomes intrusive. This is what we call intrusive r sound. British speakers, or in British English, it is actually common for speakers of British English is that they insert the r sound in some cases. Look at these examples. The idea is good, or India and China. Now the r sound is inserted there in a very weird way. The pronunciation of these two phrases becomes the following: the idea is good, or India ran China. The r sound is added there. But why it is added? It is added there in order to break the vowel cluster again. There is a hiatus there. The idea ends with a schwa, and as a word starts with a vowel. Now to break that vowel, or to avoid having hiatus, the r sound is actually inserted between the two, which is exactly the same case for India and China, and which is actually the same case for law and order, law and order. These are examples in English. We have other examples in other languages, like in Hanunu spoken in Philippines. As you can see in front of you here, we have upat means 4, onom means 6, usa means 1, tulu means 3. If you want to make these words causative and you want to say make it 4, make it 6, make it 1, make it 3, what happens is the following. Opat is 4 becomes opati, onom becomes onomi, usa becomes usahi, tulu becomes tuluhi. You can understand from the data in front of you that in this language, if you want to make the word causative by adding or saying make it 4 or make it 6 or make it 1, we simply add a suffix which is exactly one sound, which is exactly e. That's the normal case. But it's not exactly the case here in the data in front of you. What happens is that sometimes the h sound is inserted. Why? Because the stem ends with a vowel, which is the case with usa 1 and tulu 3. So instead of saying usai or turi, the h sound is inserted to break or to avoid exactly what we call the hiatus. So again, in Hanunu spoken in the Philippines, this language does not accept hiatus. So what happens? The consonant h is inserted to break up a vowel cluster when the suffix e is added. Let's take another example of insertion, but this time in English. It's a very strange example. This example happened to some English speakers of English, specifically in fast speech. It's an example of inserting a voiceless stop between a nasal and a voiceless fricative. These are examples of word dance, strand, hamster, Chomsky. Some speakers of English, when they pronounce these words, they add the insert of voiceless stop between a nasal and a voiceless fricative. Dance becomes dance. They insert the t. Strength becomes strength. They insert the k. Hamster and Chomsky become Chomsky and hamster. They insert the p. Now what you can notice here is that what is inserted, the voice stop that is inserted, is actually sharing the same features of the nasal stop. If the nasal stop there is actually alveolar, the voice stop that is inserted is also an alveolar, like the t sound, or the k sound in the velar example for strength, which is a velar nasal. But if this is the case with the Chomsky and hamster, the p, which is actually a voiceless stop, which is actually bilabial, shares the same place of articulation of the nasal, which is bilabial nasal m here. Another example in English, which is exactly, again, specific to Scottish accent, is the insertion of the schwa at the end of some words here. Take the example, as you can see in front of you, of nine, shine, fine, dine, and mine. In Scottish accents, what they say is that they add actually which is a schwa at the end of these words. So what they say is this: nine, fine, shine, dine, mine. So in English, a schwa is actually inserted after a word final nasal. This is another example of insertion of a vowel. Now let's move to the third type of syllable structure process, which is called metathesis. What is metathesis? Let's look at this example. Take the example of the word introduce. Introduce. Many English speakers, they actually pronounce the word introduce in different way. How? Look, instead of saying introduce, they say introduce. What is the difference? Difference is this: instead of saying roll, they say In other words, consonant r plus the vowel o becomes the vowel plus the consonant r. So instead of saying introduce, they say introduce. What is happening here is what is called metathesis. The r and the o sound, they actually reverse their positions. They actually interchange their positions. Why they introduce or they actually reverse their position? Because of the ease of pronunciation. This is what we call metathesis. They metasize. The two sounds here, they metasize. They reverse or they interchange their positions. We have many examples, many strange examples in English. It is believed also that some speakers of English, for the word ask, they don't actually say word ask as ask in fast speech. What they say is that they actually pronounce the ox, ox. What's happening again here? Two sounds, they reverse their positions. So CV, consonant vowel, becomes vowel consonant, or consonant 1 and consonant 2 becomes consonant 2 and consonant 1. AB becomes BA. This is exactly what we call metathesis. Let's see some examples in other languages. Let's take the example of the Austronesian language, which also undergoes metathesis. In this language, there is the case that sometimes they have three contiguous sounds that are actually consonants brought up in one single word. Now, how do speakers of this language pronounce these words with three consecutive consonants? What they do is exactly they apply the metathesis process. In the phonemic form, they have this word as danatkiaviali, which is actually made of three consonants that are brought together. But in the pronunciation of this word, it is actually pronounced as danta kiaviali. Now what you can notice here, what happens is this: the vowel a and the consonant t, they exchange or reverse their positions, they switch their positions in order to avoid that consonant cluster. Now let's see the last syllable structure process, which is coalescence. What is coalescence? Coalescence refers to when two contiguous adjacent sounds are replaced by one single sound, and that single sound shares the same features of the original sounds. Let's take the example of American English. In American English, when they want to say this year, they say this year. What happens here? If we analyze phonologically what's going on here, we will understand what is actually the case. In the word this, the sound s, which is exactly the end of this word, becomes contiguous to y, which is the beginning of the word year. Now s is an alveolar and y is exactly a palatal. When they say it, they become an alveolo-palatal adjacent sound. So when they pronounce it, they replace these two with sh, and sh is what? Is an alveolo-palatal sound. So ch or sh is replacing these two sounds, and which is actually sharing the two features of these two sounds, alveolo-palatal sound here. It is the same case with many other examples like got you, which is actually pronounced as gotcha. It's the same case with last year, which is actually pronounced as last year. It's actually the same case with don't you, which is actually pronounced don'tcha, and many other examples you can find in American English. Let me give you another example in English of coalescence. Take the example of derivational morpheme that we add to verbs if you want to change them to a noun. Take the example of the suffix yin. The suffix yin starts with the y sound, which is a palatal glide. Now, what if it is the case we are adding this to verbs that are actually ending by an alveolar sound? Take the example of relate, evade, and also confuse. Relate plus yin becomes relation. Evade plus yin becomes evasion. Confuse plus yin becomes confusion. What's going on here? What's going on here is exactly coalescence. We have the alveolar t in relate that is actually added to y, which is a palatal glide, replaced by a new sound that is an alveolar, that is exactly a palatal alveolar sh, which shares the features of the two sounds together. The same case with evade. The in evade is an alveolar that is added to yin, which is y, which is a palatal sound that is replaced by j sound, which is exactly an alveolo-palatal sound that shares the two features of the two sounds. The same case with confuse, confusion. The j sound is replacing the z sound, which is an alveolar, and also the y sound, which is exactly a palatal, and it becomes j, which actually sharing the features of the two. So relate, relation, confuse, confusion, evade, evasion. This is an example of coalescence when it comes to deriving nouns from verbs by adding the suffix yin. Now let's sum up everything we have seen in this video lesson. We've talked about dissimilation, which is the opposite of assimilation, and we said that dissimilation refers to when sounds try to look less similar to other adjacent sounds. We also talked about the phonological phenomenon hiatus, which is exactly about when two vowels belonging to two adjacent syllables are brought together without the intervention of any consonant. And the problem is that many languages do not accept this hiatus. So what will happen? Many phonological processes will take place. Like what? Like deletion. What is deletion? We said that deletion refers to when we delete a sound that exists in the phonemic form, but in the pronunciation becomes nothing. We also talked about insertion. Insertion, which is exactly the opposite of deletion, because insertion refers to the fact that we add a sound that did not exist in the phonetic form. In the phonetic form, there was nothing, but in the pronunciation, we added a sound. We saw also metathesis, and metathesis refers to the fact that when two contiguous sounds replace or switch or exchange or reverse their position in order to avoid hiatus, and also in order to simplify the pronunciation of consonant cluster. We also saw coalescence, and coalescence is exactly when two sounds that are contiguous are replaced by one single sound. and this single sound is exactly sharing the features of the two original sounds. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching this video, and please stay tuned for more coming videos and subscribe to this channel. Thank you, and see you when I see you. Bye bye.